Welcome back to Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. This is part 2 of Chapter 1 of my Iron Man. This is a fairly uneventful stretch of the chapter that just involves cleaning up a lot of the remaining brigands, trying to recruit Ira, and watching Eltshan slap the Herine army around. As such, I'm going to use a lot of this runtime to recap the story thus far without delving too much into things we don't really know yet. You may already know all of this, but this is just as much for my own benefit, as I find it difficult to keep track of all the moving parts in this subset of Fire Emblem games where there's tons of history and political intrigue. First of all, I want to thank a couple users in the comments of the last video for corroborating my offhand remark about a third generation having been planned for this game. I'm going to add some links to the description here and also in the last video in case anyone is interested. Second, I don't have many notes to append to this video, as many of the scenes in this part of the game were translated with great fidelity by Project Naga. There is one huge exception which will take up a large chunk of this video later on, but for now let's just figure out how we got here. So, in line with what I was saying, Genealogy was the first Fire Emblem to put a focus on establishing the political climate, introducing all of its players, and giving a rundown of its history. The Arcanea games do have these elements, but the presentation and scope were very different. Every Fire Emblem and Saga game since Genealogy has used this template, aside from Thracia 776 and the Arcanea remakes, of course, maybe I'm forgetting one, though the scale is obviously much more dialed down. To my memory, none of these games ever had a straight-up chronology dropped right into the intro. In Genealogy's opening crawl, we learn that there was a kingdom, later a republic, called Gran, which stood for over 400 years until the arrival of a dark god and the accumulation of its worshippers. This resulted in mass murder and sacrifice to appease this god over the next 100 years or so as the Lopto Empire grew. In Gran 535, someone from that royal family named Myra stood against the Lopto Empire, and we can infer that this was the genesis of the resistance that began to form in 611. Then, in a place called Darna, the gods granted power to some of these resistance folk, who would become the 12 Crusaders. This led to the upheaval of the Lopto Empire and the birth of modern Granbel, with the nations of Yggdrasil as you see them in the game having been formed around the Crusaders. Now, in the present day, Darna is besieged by Ezek, which is the nation of the Crusader Other, and Granbel retaliates with Prince Kurth in the lead, accompanied by Sigurd's and Aiden's fathers. This is almost entirely separate from what the player has to deal with in the prologue and first chapter, which involve the sudden belligerence of Verdun, bringing us to where we are now in my playthrough. Here you can recruit Ira, who had ventured from Ezek with her nephew Shannon, who is next in line for the Ezekian throne. It is here that you can trigger an optional conversation between Ira and Kian, which is hugely important and reveals that the Ezekian assault on Darna was merely an independent uprising and not the will of King Manannan of Ezek himself. Manannan ventured forth to rectify this issue by claiming the head of the usurper and seeking to explain the situation, but was mysteriously assassinated en route. So from our perspective, that resolves the Ezekian uprising, though Prince Kurth does not yet know there goes Lex. Prince Kurth does not yet know the truth, and we are left with trying to figure out why Verdun has gone bananas as well. So, that's pretty much all the major information that you need in order to be up to speed for where we are now. As far as losing Lex goes, I try to examine exactly why I lose certain units, like what the bad decision was that led me there in these Ironmans. And in this case, it's just overestimating Lex's defensive capabilities, because he does become very tanky later on, but not so much in the first few levels, so I overcommitted him, definitely. And now for a very long enemy and allied phase, I'm gonna just play some coffee break music from Earthbound here, so I'm gonna get some coffee. I don't want to be too hard on this game with this whole, like, you know, a bunch of copy paste, like 10 units, and then there's these like long drawn out phases where like nothing dynamic really happens, because in a way it does kind of add to the air of like, I don't know what I'm trying to say really, like it adds to the epic quality that I was talking about in either the first or the second episode, where like you can just kind of sit back and, you know, grab coffee and watch this battle unfold, and it's like sort of cool in like a cinematic sort of way, from the point of view of like, I don't know, it's not really cinematic either. I think it would help more if that kind of thing was in a game that had more variable stats for enemies and stuff, so like basically any other Fire Emblem. I suppose the solution would be for Kaga and Intelligent Systems to have iterated on this specific formula again, although I understand why they wouldn't want to just make this game again, because some of its magic is how unique it is, and how there's no other game or no other Fire Emblem or anything like it. So just repeating it and improving some things, like, it would have been cool. I'd play it, certainly, but I don't know if it would be the same thing. And perhaps, you know, whenever they finally do decide to remake this, when I'm like 60 or something, then we'll get to see more of these realizations, although, you know, in all likelihood, Kaga won't have anything to do with it, so it's sort of like, in a way, like a bastardized version, no matter what. But, I mean, from what I can tell, people really like Echoes, and I don't think Kaga was at all even consulted on that. I think it was like, done really faithfully from what I hear. And, you know, like, people really like New Mystery of the Emblem. So I do have some faith in Intelligent Systems to like work with Kaga's games and produce something good in terms of a remake. So, you know, if and when they remake this game and possibly Thracia 776, then, you know, I'm certainly going to play them, unless they just look particularly bad. But I think if they go on this same route they've been going, like outsourcing a lot of their work to developers that seem to know what they're doing and seem to understand what makes Fire Emblem good, like they did with Three Houses, which I think is one of the better Fire Emblems, then we should be pretty well off. But, you know, I like this chapter on the whole. There's only one chapter in this entire game that I really, truly, wholly dislike, which we're not going to get to for a bit, if we get there. And there's like a couple chapters, like the next one, for example, where I don't dislike it, but there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of wrong with it, and could be improved, and like the pacing's really bad. But more on that in a moment. Enjoy a brief interlude with some Chrono Trigger music. My favorite chapter in the game is, getting a little ahead of myself, but probably chapter, what is this, number 1? So chapter 3. It's probably my favorite in the whole game. I think it's the best realization of what this game should be. In the comments of the previous video, dryzalizer, I thought it was dryalizer at first, but I see now that it's dryzalizer or dryzalizer, said, "You mentioned how there is very little meaningful castle defense in this game, and I completely agree. I'm not sure if the proper fix is to come up with a brand new system, add more enemies that attack your home castle during the chapter, or keep it the same and add in a rescue mechanic so mounted units can bring foot units with them. This is just one of so many changes that could be done with a remake. I have many ideas, but if they were all implemented, it risks changing the feel of the game so much that I might not like the result as much as the original." And I wanted to bring this up because this is a really good addendum to what I had brought up before and what I was just talking about. So I completely agree that adding too many new mechanics like rescue and whatnot could really just damage the overall feel of this game. Whereas, like, it really does need, like, at least one of those things. I don't know if rescue so much would be, like, in the spirit of, like, the Kaga vision or what have you, which sounds kind of dumb when I say it outside of my own head, but I think you know what I mean. Like, because if you think about it, Fire Emblem 1 didn't have rescue, Gaiden didn't have it to my knowledge, and Mystery of the Emblem didn't have it. So the only game that Kaga ever did that actually had rescue was 3CS776. And it was, like, pretty liberal in that game. It's not in Tearing Saga, it's not in Berbick Saga, and I'm pretty sure it's not in Vistaria. Although I've only briefly played that one. So I don't know if that's an indication that Kaga, like, wasn't really happy with rescue, like, principally speaking. So, you know, it may or may not work in this game. I mean, if you get bogged down too much in, like, rescuing and dropping and giving as, like, a game mechanic, then it kind of, like, takes a lot of the magic away from a game like this, I think, where it just has that, like, cinematic and, like, you know, story gameplay integrated well sort of vibe with just what kind of game it is. Not so much a game that you play in order to break it, although, you know, with the holy weapons and everything, this is definitely a game you can break, but it's not like with some of the other games that they just lend themselves well to playing them over and over again with, like, highly efficient play and just maximizing everything. Even though this is the first Fire Emblem that does have rank, although I think most players are in agreement that it doesn't really do rank all that well, honestly. It makes you play the game in, like, kind of an unnatural, weird, and at times tedious way. It's arguably, I think it was done best in 3CS776, actually, where it just doesn't have that many categories. It's just you recruit as many characters as you can, and you do it in as few turns as possible. There's no, like, stupid funds ranking, or in the case of this game, like, you know, I don't think there is a funds rank, but there's, like, you know, experience or like, you know, how many levels you gain sort of rank. But as far as the castle defense thing goes, I think what I would do is, on the whole, my best idea is to have, and hear me out on this one, ambush spawns. Not, like, directly next to the castle or anything, but just at completely random turns in, like, kind of an avenue a little ways away from the castle, or some other kind of out of the way spot on the map where it doesn't really interfere with the main part of your force, but it just has like a smorgasbord of totally random crap just start coming at you from some path, and it would be like, it would have like a minimum number of units, so it's not like it would just be one random Pegasus Knight that just comes out. It would be like some combination of chapter appropriate enemies that just come out of nowhere, and there would also probably be some other parameters, but like they could have different weapons and everything. Like some of them could have steel, some of them could have iron. So there would be like a limit to how many scrubs could be in that group. So you would always have like sort of something resembling a commander in the group, maybe. And you know, I would keep the first couple chapters the same, where the prologue, it's like there's a couple brigands that could maybe make their way over there if you're like really negligent, or you just send all your units into one spot, and there are some others that you know, leak through from like a different spot. And then in this chapter, they scare you a little bit, like I was saying before. Elchan just comes and saves you, and it's not an issue at all. And then in the next chapter, you know, they do try to have Fury Squad come at you, but it's like, you know, they just kind of fly over across like 10 turns, and there's no real danger. You just, I think you could even possibly have like Sigurd and Quan ride all the way from the other side of the map and make it there in time if you really needed to. Maybe not, but it'd be very close, especially if you had some units lagging behind to begin with. And then, like, an enemy force comes from, like, the roughly center castle, and they come and attack the one that Lachesis starts at. So it's like, yeah, that's for an unaware player, or like a really new player, or somebody who hasn't played much Fire Emblem or tactical RPGs, that might be an issue. And they might have that castle get seized, although that's like kind of a good thing, because then you get to seize it yourself. And beyond that, like, let alone, they can't even reach your home castle before you have time to react, so it's just not that big of a deal. But part of the reason that I like Chapter 3 is because it does kind of have that whole thing where you got to split your army up, because you're getting attacked from 3 or 4-ish sides. And then, like, later on, you have another set of brigands that come from the north, and they attack, like, not your home castle, but I guess they are, it's like you have to make a stand at one of your auxiliary castles, so that's kind of cool. But then it's like, it's not a thing at all in Chapter 4. It's like sort of a thing in Chapter 5 in the beginning, and then I don't want to delve too deeply into it so that I get into the second generation and everything. And I do kind of want to comment somewhat on what's happening on the screen, even though it's what we've been doing for this whole entire chapter. But this is the part where it's like, there are always these parts in the first generation where it's like, Sigurd seizes somewhere, or he has to do something like recruit Ira, and that puts him behind the rest of your army, and that's like what suffices for difficulty sometimes in this game. In a way, I don't think that was really intended necessarily, but I find that is like how it plays out if you're trying to play in like a relatively quick manner. And, you know, not having Sigurd there is a huge detriment, because he's not only powerful, but he gives, you know, hit and avoid bonuses to your units, which, since many of them use swords, it's effectively makes some of them invincible if they're like also standing on a forest or something. Although, as we've seen, everyone is mortal, especially when I'm in control of them. But this is like, I didn't really make good use of him here, but this is like a great opportunity to get due, to steal some gold. I forget if these guys have like higher than average gold, because the If you didn't know, the guys that are ransacking villages in all of the chapters, they all have 5,000 gold, which is, I think, pretty much the highest an enemy unit can have in their inventory. So, a lot of the time, once you have due, it is more in your favor to not have, like, Alec and Nisha run forward and try and kill that guy as quickly as you can, but to just let the village die, and then just have Dew attack that bandit to get the gold. And in that way, you can give the gold to anybody, because Dew has that function to him. Obviously, both are ideal, but if you have to choose, then it's better not to just, like, break formation and kill that guy just so you can get like 1,000 or 1,500 gold, unless the village has an item, which it does happen sometimes where the first village that is going to completely burn to the ground in any given chapter is also the one that has like a really good item in it, or at least an item. In which case you do want to send somebody ahead. But in the case of this village in the lower left on this map, it's all it is gold. I'm almost positive. So it's not that big of a deal unless you want the lore, which, spoiler alert, I don't get here. But it is going to play a big part in the segment I have coming up here. But before we get into that, I just want to thank the commenters on my videos. As always, the comments are always my favorite part of this whole thing. Not so much like the likes and all of that kind of superficial stuff. I really love just generating discussion and responding to that, especially in video if I can. I've been naming you guys specifically in all of these videos because I figure all of you have been submitting questions and comments through public forums, essentially, so I figure it's kind of like, obviously you aren't trying to be completely private or anything, but if anybody does have a question or comment that they don't want featured in one of these kinds of things, you can always send me an email. My email should be listed in the About section of this YouTube page, or you can send me a private message on Reddit or something. So sorry if that has ruffled anybody's feathers thus far, but I hope you enjoyed this next little part here. This question doesn't come from anybody except my own mind, so this is like my own question, so to speak. When the unnamed ruffian accosts Deirdre after he sees Martha, he says, "What's the matter? Come on, I'm just asking for a little date." This is completely accurate, however, there's a bit of interesting wordplay involved in the Japanese. What he says for that last line is, "Chotto kurai tsukiatte kurete mo yo." Chotto kurai means for a little bit, and tsukiatte means go out with. So this isn't exactly one of those cases where a translator turned an explicit statement into something benign. That really is what he's saying. However, I want to point out that there is another way you can read this sentence. Chotto kuraitsuki atte kurete mo yo. Kuraitsuki means to bite or to nibble, while atte is a verb you can attach to other verbs to mean to do something together or to each other. So from that perspective, he's also saying, I was hoping we could sink our teeth into one another. Of additional note is that when Sigurd accosts the ruffian, he says, "Omae tachi," plural. While it's not entirely clear that he isn't merely referring to Deirdre and the ruffian together, it's more likely that there are actually several ruffians harassing Deirdre. In a similar vein, Project Naga has Deirdre call the ruffian Sir, while in the original text she doesn't actually give any specific term of address, either singular or plural. Also, the way they wrote the rest of the conversation makes it sound like the ruffians recognize Sigurd, feel too annoyed by his white knighting to continue their sexual assault, then apologize to Deirdre of their own accord before leaving. One of them says, "What's your problem? This one's... Ugh, you're not that Granvale paladin, are you?" Sigurd replies, You understand the situation? Then be on your way. There are none I loathe more than your kind. The girl has given you her answer. Now leave her be and get out of my sight. The ruffian finishes with, Yeah, got it. My bad, missy. I was just teasing is all. Sorry, I'll be off now. In reality, after Sigurd tells them to let her go, one of the ruffians says, The fuck are you? You wouldn't happen to be that Granbell Crusader? Sigurd replies, If you understand your predicament, then you'd best beat a hasty retreat. I detest your kind like no other. Now apologize to the girl and get lost. The ruffian trembles. Of course. We're real sorry, girlie. We weren't being serious or nothing. Please forgive us. Further on in this scene, when Sigurd is speaking with some village elder, he expresses his desire to see Deirdre again. In Project Naga, the elder says, Alas, sir, for it cannot be so. The folk of the Spirit Forest staunchly refuse to partake in the world beyond their woods. Furthermore, that girl and members of her clan are forbidden from ever liaising with men. Village lore dictates that should this ever happen, calamity would befall the world. You have no choice, sir. Resign yourself of that girl. This is actually quite a bit different, and there's part of a line that's actually omitted here. In Japanese, he says, That might be a bit difficult. For one, the people of the Spirit Village cannot abide any contact with the outside world. Moreover, that particular girl, it's been said, may not mingle with men, lest they become burdened with her destiny. The people of the village believe that if this principle were to be violated, the world would be beset by catastrophe. I don't really know if it's hogwash or not, Sonny, but I'd say going after her is more trouble than it's worth. Also, if you're fast enough to save the village in the lower left corner of the map, the old man there fleshes out the rest of this village's history and legends. He mentions that Deirdre was taken in by the Hamlet's old prophet, which to me at least evokes some sort of wizened old man in a robe type character. The phrase in Japanese is Uranai Obaba, which means like a fortune-telling crone. For a good example of this archetype, take a look at the Dragon Ball character Uranai Baba. When put together with the conversation Sigurd has with the Elder, we can infer that it's Deirdre's surrogate mother or grandmother who is the source of these seemingly apocryphal predictions about Deirdre's fate. So, that pretty much does it for this portion of the game. As always, if you have any questions for this series or suggestions for music to play during drawn-out allied phases, please feel free to leave a comment below. And, of course, thanks for watching.